You could have the best lawn care and landscaping company out there, but if your brand looks unimpressive or even typical, your prospective clients might assume so is your work. In an industry that's so visual, a lot of companies are sending the wrong message without even realizing it. So today, we're pulling back the curtain on visual branding from someone who's rebranded billion-dollar companies. Hey, John, how you doing? It's great to see you again.
Yeah, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me, Chad. I'm happy to be here.
Sure. So, John, I've enjoyed connecting with you, getting to know you, and I think we kind of like preach the choir a lot because we're real passionate about branding and how companies represent themselves. And
hmm
a lot of the things like when I saw you speak last, talking about brand and how a company's representing itself in the green industry. Like these are things I've been thinking about and frustrated about for decades now, and can never seem to really put my finger on certain elements of visual branding. So I appreciate you coming on today to talk to me. So before we get started, why don't we do a little intro of you for the people that don't know you? Tell them, first off, John Dalton from McFarland Stanford, tell us all about what McFarland Stanford's about, and then give us a little just kind of recap of your professional career and why you're here talking about visual branding today.
Like you mentioned, I'm the technically fractional CMO of McFarland Stanford. So I've been working with them now for a little over 2 years. McFarland Stanford is essentially a consulting company that specializes in the landscape industry. So, like you specialize in the landscape industry, so do we. And we've spent the last 10 years working with landscape business owners kind of in a peer group consulting type model, helping them really elevate their business using that peer group is kind of like I would almost equate it to like a small board of directors, right? And then that's really the power of those peer groups. So my job has mostly been to help McFarland Stanford find new peer group members. But the other thing that I do is I also help our peer group members with their marketing. And that's why you've seen a couple of those presentations that I've given are designed to help those guys in the landscape industry make better marketing decisions.
Yeah, and I appreciate what McFarland Stanford does for the industry. I mean, we see you guys everywhere, and I've met multiple people on your team, and it's just been a delight getting to know them. So thanks for coming on. I think we would agree, and probably some of the viewers, listeners are going to agree too, that the landscape industry isn't always as progressive as they need to be, and some brands are really far behind as it relates to their visual identity. I mean, the reality is that people get a logo created and 20 years later, that's really all they've done. They have a
Mhm.
20, 30-year-old logo about their company, and it can look outdated and it can either build trust or introduce doubt. And so I want to give you a chance to kind of unpack this. So explain, why are you a branding expert? Give us a little bit of the title in here is about talking about billion-dollar industries and
Mhm.
companies. So tell us a little bit about your past involvement in marketing with a big brand that everybody knows.
Sure. Yeah. So I've been in marketing and advertising for over 25 years. And I started in uh, kind of the big brand world, right? And my first advertising agency experience was on the American Airlines account. So obviously a multi-million dollar brand. Um, and then my real brand education started after I got out of business school, and I was working for an old company called Kinko's that most people probably still remember. Um, and at that point, Kinko's was, I mean, I say they had no brand standards because they were started by two stoners in a taco truck, which is literally the truth. So we had all of these international franchisees, and they just basically did whatever they wanted. Like if you looked at the Kinko's Japan website, it had anime chicken characters and all this. Like they just had free license to do whatever they wanted. And the problem was there was no consistency. Well, what happened in 2005, I believe it was, FedEx purchased Kinko's. And FedEx was a company with a much bigger budget and probably some of the most rigorous brand standards I've ever seen. And it was a real crash course for me because part of my responsibility was rebranding all of our locations outside of the United States. So I had to go to Japan, for example, and give them a presentation on how these brand standards worked and what they were required to do. Started out as a very difficult conversation, and 6 months later, they very much appreciated the constraints that that framework provided. FedEx did everything very, very strictly when it, from everything from the planes and the trucks to uniforms, in-store signage, everything was on the same kind of a grid, used the same colors. And, what I realized during that process is by having those strict standards, it really helps with the recall of the brand and how everything ties together, and it makes everything very recognizable. And that's really the point. So in working past that experience, I became an entrepreneur too. I had a couple of companies with my wife. I took that knowledge, was able to build our second business to 7 figures within 18 months. We eventually sold it. Circled back to the way I got involved in the landscape industry was my boss at FedEx, Jim Calley, is now one of the principals at McFarland Stanford.
Well, he must have trusted you to bring you back into the fold to help.
Yeah, we've been connected as kind of mentor relationship for many years. So that's how I got kind of back into the industry. And you're right, the branding in this industry, there's some really good examples, and then there's some that are not great. And a lot of it is, we have a lot of guys in this industry that started pushing a mower at 15, and marketing was kind of an afterthought, right? And especially any type of, like the level of education and branding that I have, these guys, they don't know any of this stuff. So, maybe they started with a logo they sketched on a notepad when they were a senior in high school, and that's still what they're rolling with, right? And it just hasn't evolved. So my hope is to really just give a few recommendations and a little bit of a peek behind the curtain of how these big brands do it to help all of your listeners understand, like, it doesn't have to be super expensive, but there are some general guidelines that you can use that will help you just look more professional, and then also help your brand just be more recognizable and create more awareness.
Yeah, it's even I'm marketing. I've been in marketing, so I've been in the green industry for like 25 plus years, and I've really been in marketing for the last 13, 14 years. And before that, my family actually had a sign shop. So I got into kind of graphic design because I had to lay out and put logos on trucks and, work other elements that kind of coordinated with that. And I would say I have probably above average artistic eye for like scale and color and balance, but I still have no idea what I'm doing a lot of times. And I think like you said, the landscape company owners that are out here that may have a passion for, maybe just sales or operations, or just working with their people or financial literacy, all those things, like, this is usually not one of their talents. So if you're listening to this, I want you to understand that, and we have empathy for this, that no one's expecting you to have that. And if you're looking at your brand, just give it a little bit more of a critical eye. So John, how do you take like the elements, like how can people that might not be minded in this area, how can they learn what makes a better visual brand?
I think one of the things that I tell people when I give the branding presentation is my philosophy is clarity and consistency equals customers, right? And what I mean by that is it's clarity in design, and then language, and then consistently doing the same thing over and over again, right? So one of the first things that I tell people to do if they want to start examining their brand is, take pictures of their trucks, their uniforms, screen grab their website, all their social media posts, any kind of mailers, anything that they do, and print those out, stick them on a wall, and see, do those things look like they're from the same company? 9 times out of 10, they don't. And that's a really good kind of way to illustrate like where the mistakes are being made. And a lot of times I see it's like different people are in charge of different things, right? And they don't have consistent standards. So they're just kind of making things up on the fly. And you end up with things that look like it's from 5 different companies instead of one. And that confusion is not good.
So multiple people inside the company involved, and then there's multiple graphic designers or marketing people, and they may have like one or two examples of something, and it's kind of like this whisper down the lane where it kind of starts one place and then it kind of changes as time goes, and all of a sudden now we
Mhm.
have a color that we've never used before, or now the font's different over here, or now this is bigger, this is smaller. And yeah, people are trying to do the best they can, but they're not informed from the get-go about what's right and what we don't do.
Yeah, I think the other thing that people really need is some brand guidelines. And the way I try to explain this to the landscapers is this is basically like the operations manual for your marketing, right? So you need to have those rules outlined for people so they know what colors to use. I mean, specifically like the CMYK and hex codes. So you're not using three different kinds of blue, right? It's always the same color. Um, Fonts should be part of that. Even the language that you use, you want to make sure that you're saying the same things. Um, and then how you use your logo, what ways you shouldn't use your logo, space around the logo. You need to have all those things outlined so that if you have different people in charge of different things, they're using the same colors, they're using the same fonts, and they're following the same rules. It's no different than training people in the field uh, to use your equipment. You want them all doing it the same way, maintaining it the same way, and how you treat your brand is no different than that.
Yeah, so a brand style guide, one,
Mm-hmm.
two, possibly three-page guide that gives different uses and examples. And then every time you have a print project or a web project, you give those people those standards, they follow it, and then everybody's playing from the same sheet of music. So let's talk about parts of this. So let's talk about the color. Let's talk about the fonts and layout. I mean, like, what are these common misconceptions or maybe things people don't even realize?
Well, I'm starting with color. I know one of the things that you and I have talked about is, why is there so many people using green in landscaping? I mean,
Green
it
and
makes
black.
sense, right? It's We call it the green industry sometimes, and green is the color that kind of indicates nature, growth. So obviously, they're going to gravitate towards that. But colors can mean different things, and it's really should be reflective of who your customer is and what the personality of your brand is. Like we have a very successful client in Minnesota. Their primary colors are red and white, right? That doesn't necessarily fit the mold of a typical landscaper, but because they do it very consistently with their trucks and their uniforms, they stand out and they're very recognizable on a job site. So people know them as the red trucks, right? That becomes something that is recognizable to them. So understanding the psychology of colors and what they mean is important, but you also want to make sure that um, you understand how you can use color as a way to stand out against your competition in your marketplace, and the psychology behind that, because it's not just recognizing the name. The color can be very recognizable, like red and Coca-Cola, right? Those are two things are almost synonymous. Or that bright fuchsia color in T-Mobile. I mean, they use that incessantly, and that starts to become something you recognize as part of their brand. Um, and doing that consistently is very important.
It used to be like, I remember, they'd say red's bad. That indicates aggression. If you stuck babies in a red room, they would grow up to be serial killers or something crazy like that.
Yeah.
I mean, it can't be that cause and effect. I mean, I see brands like you said, Coca-Cola is, that's synonymous with a brand that most people have a positive feeling about. And when I
Mm-hmm.
think about Coca-Cola, it's the community in the world, and they've done some really great ad campaigns. So for me, it's not about the red. And I think that's kind of where a lot of companies in this industry, they get hung up on, we have to use this color because that's how we communicate something specific. Because if we don't use
Mm-hmm.
green, they're going to have no idea that we're in the green industry. And
Yeah.
we'll talk about icons. So I want to get into grass and trees here in logos too. But yeah, I mean, so it's not a hard fast rule.
Yeah. Not a hard, fast rule, but, I think it's always more important to make sure that you're doing something different to stand out, and don't do it just to stand out, but Like examine your marketplace and figure out who your main competitors are. What colors are they using? You don't want to use the same thing. Part of what you want to do is differentiate yourself. Now you can do that in a loud, bad way, right? You don't want to go totally with like teal and yellow and something that somebody's not going to want to have parked in front of their house, right? But you can pick colors that are a deeper blue, or maybe use green as a just a secondary color. Um, but how can you make it look different than your competition so that you do stand out? I think that's more important than just using. Well, I have to use green because that's the industry that I'm in.
Yeah, I think that what I've seen in when I, again, my untrained eye, when I look at things, it's either not enough color or way too much. So you get the two color, the green and the black. That's the most common. I've seen brands that use like 8 or 9 different colors in their central branding. Like their logo actually has 4 or 5 colors, and then are using different colors to indicate different service lines. And I think there's a place for that, but it just, for me, like it feels confusing because there's just too much going on.
Yeah. Yeah. Keeping it simple is always the best rule, whether you're talking about color or anything else. I think most brands have 2 to 3 kind of primary colors, and maybe they have a set of secondary colors that they use for, whether that's promotional buttons or just different things. But you don't need more than that. And if your logo has 5 colors in it or more, that is not helping with your brand recognition or people's ability to remember who you are.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about also fonts. I mean, they
Mhm.
carry a specific message or tone that people don't realize subconsciously that that's coming across. So, what would be your advice about what font choice you use?
Yeah, I think with the font, they do carry a lot of kind of psychology behind them. There's 2 different styles of fonts. I'm sure you know this. There's serif fonts, and that's basically the fonts with the little feet on it, like Times Roman. And then you have sans serif fonts, which are a little bit more clean and modern, and they don't have the little feet at the top and the bottom. Um, the sans serif font is more modern, and the serif font is more traditional. So a good example is, we have a client in Dallas who works with some older, very wealthy customers, and they want to convey like a little bit more like long, like they've been around for a while. They're more traditional in design in terms of how they build gardens. So they use that serif font with, that's more like a newspaper headline. Um, and that just conveys more tradition. If you're a younger company, you want to differentiate yourself as more of a modern choice, use those cleaner fonts like a Helvetica or a Futura or something like that, because that communicates something that's cleaner and more modern. So it's about understanding what you do and who your customers are, and what do you think is going to uh, appeal to them, right?
Yeah.
And that's really important in choosing the font, especially for your logo. Um, and then you don't want to have too many fonts for your communication pieces, because again, that just makes it harder for people to read. So if
Yeah.
you have 4 different fonts in a postcard, that makes it super confusing, and most people, they're going to get hung up somewhere because there's just too much happening.
Yeah. And a little footnote on fonts, because we run into this, is you want to use, in most cases, we use Google fonts. So Google
Mm-hmm.
has a whole suite of fonts, and that's your best bet on your website, that no matter what people are loading it on, that your font's going to render. Because we get into these discussions sometimes where people do have strict brand guidelines, and they say, we have
Mm-hmm.
an Adobe font that we use and we have to use this. We say, this is a problem if you're going to use a third party font on your website. If something's
Yeah.
ever disrupted in their server, no one can read words on your website. So there are instances where you can find things that are near matches for like that type of case. But I agree with you. In print, stick to it. All right. Well,
Yeah.
let's talk about the thing I kind of alluded to, iconography. Like
Mm-hmm.
people have icons in their logos, which are awesome. That's a great way to be memorable. And the one thing I don't know. I've been in this industry since '98, and I kind of just think it's hysterical now that you have to, every time I have someone come into the website and they want information, I look at their website and their logo, and I would tell you that 98% of the time it's got a tree or probably grass in the logo. And
Hmm.
again, okay, well, we're a tree company. Now we're doing lawn. So now we had to get grass to the logo. And now we start doing pests. So now we need to put a bug in the logo too. It's like we have to have all these icons because no one's going to know what we do if we don't use the icons. And then you have other brands. I'm sure you can give us some that are out there in the market that everybody knows their logo, the icon has nothing to do with the service they provide. So what is
Yeah.
this crutch of an icon? Why do we, and again, what's the opportunity to differentiate if you don't use a tree or grass in your logo?
Yeah, no, I do think that's a trend. I mean, the icon, or some people would call it the logo. Like you have one like behind you, and it's also on your shirt, right? It's next to your name. I think a lot of people put too much weight on what that is. Like they think that's the most important part of their logo, and it isn't. I mean, if you're Nike and you've spent 50 years defining what the swoosh is, yeah, you can put that on the side of a truck or a box and everybody knows what that means. But when you start and you just have, this kind of stylized tree icon as part of your logo, nobody knows what that means, right? You have to define that over a period of years in order for people to recognize that icon as you. So your name is much, much more important than the icon. The icon can make it seem a little more professional, maybe uh, help communicate the name if your name doesn't scream landscaping, but it's not as important as the name itself. It isn't the most important part of your brand, and I think people get hung up on that because you can go on Canva or Fiverr and get somebody to design you a cool icon. But if people don't know what that icon means, it's not really helpful to you.
So I've seen a theme in our industry, and I'm kind of indifferent about it as it relates to visual branding and icons. But there's a really great graphic designer that does a lot of really good brands in our industry.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I'm not saying this is bad or good. I just see the trend. And we have several clients that have used them and redid their logo. And that design theory is get a mascot. Like we're going to put a mascot in the logo. And I see
Mm-hmm.
it then too on HVAC and plumbing. And anywhere I go on vacation, I'm seeing this trend now where there's like an animated animal of some sorts or whatever. And I, I have indifferent feel. Like I can not like it. And then I can like it. Like I'm on both sides of it. Like I see it
Yeah.
done really well. Sometimes it looks too corny. And I'm not quite sure how I feel about it, honestly. But we have a couple clients that have really fun characters in their logos, like Oasis Turf and Tree. They have a toucan. I mean, that is super unique. We
Yeah.
have Kingstown. Well, that's easy. So they have a little king. His name actually, Christian, they named his name behind the scenes as Mo, not
Mm-hmm.
MOWMOE. And it kind of is a play on words. But we have other clients too, and they have this. And I keep seeing this more and more. So, I mean, what are your thoughts? Do you feel like there's a cost at doing that? Do you feel like there's certain types of brands that it wouldn't go well with?
Yeah. I think that's interesting. And I think, that has potential to go wrong or to limit you. Because in my view, when you have a mascot, you're more of for lack of a better term, like a middle class brand, right? So if you're in Dallas and you're working in Highland Park, which is this like super upscale neighborhood where like Jerry Jones and Mark Cuban live, they don't want a truck with a toucan on the side parked in front of their house, right? So part of it is again understanding who your customer is. I think if you're more you do a lot of lawn maintenance for, maybe a wider audience, that could be a good way to inject some fun and differentiate yourself from the guys with just the tree on the truck. But again, it's a risky strategy in my opinion because if done well, I think it can work. We have a couple clients that do that, but they're more in kind of the lower end, like volume maintenance kind of business as opposed to high end custom design, $500,000 backyard pool people.
Yeah.
So I think it's a matter of what does it fit with your brand and your customer.
So tell me some examples. Like, what are some of your favorite in the industry? Like, what and why do you love them?
Yeah, there's a couple that come to mind. Like we have, there's a guy down in Louisiana. His name is Chase Mullen. He's been in our peer groups for a while, and he's grown from 2 trucks to now he's got multiple locations. And he has a really nice, clean brand, and he's done a really good job of evolving it over time. From it used to be Mullen Lawn and Landscape. I don't know exactly how he started, but it was much longer, included a description. To now, his trucks just say Mullen on the side, and he's built recognition for that name. His trucks are like a nice dark blue or white sometimes, and they're either white with the blue letters, the dark blue letters, or dark blue with the white letters. And it's nice and clean and crisp. And I don't know exactly how he did this over time, but it almost was like he had a brand expert helping him. Like, okay, now you need the moniker as part of your brand that says lawn and landscape. And then it just became kind of design. And now it's just Mullen, and people recognize that in his marketplace. I mean, it's not predominantly green at all. That's a secondary color. Uh, Nice, clean sans serif font that you can see from a mile away on the side of his truck. It's great. Um, Another one that I do like, he's actually one of your clients, Chase Coates Outback up in Idaho. His is a little bit different. He uses a green, but it's a really bright green. And his trucks are black, which is not the industry standard, but he keeps them super, super clean, which is really important, especially with a black truck or a white truck. So they always look really, really good. The logo is super simple. He doesn't have a lot of information on the truck itself. His uniforms are the same way. But all of his guys look the same. All the trucks look the same, and they're all super, super clean. And I mean, if that it's costs a lot of money to rebrand a truck, but if you can't do that right now, start washing them at least once a week at a minimum. That's gonna help your brand perception for sure.
Put some Bondo in some of the quarter panels that are rusting out. Maybe hit it with some spray paint at least. But yeah,
Exactly.
Chase is great. We've been working with him for over 10 years now. And, actually some of his trailers, so they have the black, everything's black. And then the logo is 2 shades of green. And
Mhm.
one of his trailers he actually did in reflective green. And I saw some pictures of it lit up at night. I mean, it's like you cannot avoid that. Like it just like bursts. It's like neon.
Yeah.
And we're actually redoing his website right now. So it's going to be black, and we're going to have little pops of that green. We're redoing it
Mhm.
because the one he has now is like 6, 7 years old. But yeah, I love that. And I know Mullen too. Mullen, great brand. We did videos for them years ago. And it's this, like you said, I think there's a leaf, the logo, but it's not so forced. Like the
Right.
leaf, you can tell, we know it's a leaf. People look at it, they know it's a leaf, but it's not like a literal leaf. Like it's two, I think if I remember right, it's just like two like halves of like a pointed oval that are pushed
Mhm.
together. And that's the thing too that I like when I see in logos, you know what it is, but it's not the actual literal like clip art of a leaf. And it just carries a way different message to me. I don't know what it is, but I know I like it when I see it.
Yep. Yeah. No, I know what you're talking about too. It's kind of a stylized icon that, but the biggest thing in his brand is his name, right? That's what you can see. It's not dominated by a giant leaf that actually distracts you from the name. It's supportive of it. Like it provides an anchor to the name that helps kind of direct your eye to actually read the word Mullen, which is kind of what you want.
Sure. So I think the first tip that we outlined so far is have someone create these brand guidelines, simplify things, show potential uses in a brand style guide. Make
Mhm.
sure everybody's playing from that sheet of music. But there are people that are listening to this or watching this and they know they're out of date. Like they're still wearing, it's like me, I'm still wearing the shirt. I probably shouldn't wear the shirt. I'm pretty sure it's out of style, but I do really like it. Like that's kind of
Yeah.
my dad, now grandfather, uh, quest is trying to stay hip but not look like, I'm trying too hard. But
Yeah,
there are people with their
age
logos.
appropriate, Chad.
Yeah, it has to be age appropriate. So I know that there's people out there. I've talked to
Uh,
people numerous times. They know that they look dated. They know that logo, but it's on 50 trucks. And do you know how much money it would cost to rewrap all these trucks? And we'd have to do all of our print materials over, and we have to do all this. And I know that's a huge expense.
mhm.
And so what would you recommend as a brand that, we're going to go out now, we're going to maybe wear a mess. Maybe we have 5 colors in our logo. It's too busy. The fonts look old school. We don't have consistency. We're going to go and now develop new brand standards. It's easy to fix on a website, but what do you do in the real world where you have all these assets? Like how do you phase that out? How do you tackle that?
Yeah, that's a big challenge. It's one thing when you're working with a FedEx size budget and you can flip it all in 90 days, and it's not that big of a deal. But for a small business owner, that's totally different. So I think this is a really good question. One of the things I tell people is if you think your brand is dated and it needs to be changed, like the mistake I see a lot of people make is they scrap it and start over, right? And your brand, whether you like it or not, or whether it needs to be updated or not, it does have some equity, it has some value. So I try to tell everybody, how can you evolve the brand? You know, and maybe this takes a few steps to get it to actually what you want it to be so that you can do it over time in a cost effective way. Um, you're right, with things online, that's very easy to fix. You can update the brand, swap it out on a web page, and it doesn't cost that much money. The trucks are the biggest expense, because those wraps are really kind of steep. If you're doing a full wrap or just you know painting something on the side or doing a door cling, um, but I always try to tell them to approach it systematically. Like the first thing is, okay, what do we need to do to clean it up? And the first thing I tell them is literally clean it up. Like before we get to the point where we wrap your trucks, let's make sure that they're getting washed. Is there information on there that you can easily take off? For example, I see a lot of people do trucks that they treat the side of a truck like a website, right? So it has an image on it, it has a list of services,
Social
and
media icons, I still see it. I can't believe, like, I thought that was like a 10 or 15 year ago play. Like, hey, we're on
yeah,
face, like us on Facebook. Like, oh man, I'm going to stop in traffic now and make sure I look that brand up on Facebook.
right. Yeah,
All
nobody's
kinds
going
of
to do
fun.
that. I mean,
Yeah.
at most they have what 8 seconds to read your truck and recognize it. So if there's some of those things that you can remove, right, just so that your name is a little bit more prominent and has some more white space around it, that's a good first step. But you need to make a plan to redo that fleet. Um, Maybe you wrap that into when you get new trucks. That's when you change them over. And a lot of people, um, they'll get new trucks, especially if they're leasing them every few years. That's the opportunity. You're going to have to pay to get them wrapped or painted anyway. That's when you can do it if you can't afford to do all the fleet at once. I do think that getting your team and your crew cleaned up, like with uniforms, that's not nearly as expensive as the trucks. That's a really good first step because any of those things that the customers see, that's where you want to start, right? Your trucks are important because a lot of times that's the first thing that your customers see, so that's your first impression. Um, so making sure they're clean, that's the first thing I would do. But your crew is the same way. You want to make sure that's clean. You want to make sure the equipment is clean, or you want to convey that you take care of things because that means to your customer that you're going to take care of that. Um, so you can develop a plan to kind of switch those things out over time when you get the new trucks. But things like uniforms, website, even if you have sales collateral for your sales team, that's stuff that I would plan to do fairly quickly.
Yeah, and I think small changes are okay. Like you said, evolving your brand. So it might be, okay, we know things are dated, but the thing that's most dated about our brand is that icon. We're going to
Hmm.
change the icon, but we're not going to change the colors. And we're going to keep everything else the same. So maybe you do want to bite it all off at
Yep.
one time, change colors, fonts, and that. But sometimes it's just a matter of a brand refresh, or the
Hmm.
font looks a little dated and old, or maybe it's too similar to someone else. A lot of
Yep.
times we work with brands. It's really common. They don't. You had mentioned it earlier. They don't have a call to action color on their website. So like
Hmm.
they're green and black, and the button on the website's green. Well, it doesn't pop out. So we say, what's a complementary color that we could make this, like maybe a burnt orange or something else? And every
Hmm.
time you see that color, it means I'm ready to go. I'm ready to take
Yep.
action. So if that becomes something that's predominant in your brand, I've told them before, hey, if you really like that and you think it's distinctive, you have that bottom, like on the trucks, like below, like where the bumper door trim is on the side, you could
Hmm.
actually like wrap that in that color. So if you want to pull that color into your brand and have a little bit of distinction, we've had clients that use pink, burnt orange, purple in their brand. And you talk about
Hmm.
standing out. Maybe it's just putting a pinstripe between like the letters of the name, or putting it underneath there, and just a pop of color sometimes is enough. So you can refresh. Don't
Right.
think that we're saying you have to scrap what you have. There are some brands that you can do that with.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good way to put it. Is that refresh? I think that's the right word. Um, is it your colors that look old? Can you swap a green for a newer green, or is there slowly ways you can update it? And I mentioned FedEx at the beginning of this. When they bought Kinko's, they had a 5-year plan for how they were going to transition that brand. First, it was FedEx Kinko's Office and Print Center, which is a real mouthful, right? But they wanted to keep that Kinko's name in the brand because it had value for a period of time, and they didn't want to shock the system of the customer and think, is this even the same place, right? And then over a period of years, it just became FedEx FedEx Office. That's all it is now. But they had a plan to get it there. They didn't do it all at once. Even a company with a $500 million marketing budget.
I saw that in our industry too, because for a few years we worked with Yellowstone and did some project work with them. And I love their brand, like their icon,
Mhm.
their font. There's so many good things about that brand. And they put a lot of thought into it. And when they acquire a new brand, one of the things they do underneath that company name is a Yellowstone landscape company. So that's one
Mhm.
of the ways they slowly transition. And then they do a complete rollout. I mean, you're talking different name, different everything, but having a plan to do this over a staged period of time, that's the way to do it.
I just had a conversation with somebody about that because they're buying a landscape location in another market and they want to eventually pull it over to their brand. And they're going to do something very similar to what you said, like keeping the brand name for a period of time, you know, from their existing brand, and then they will slowly change it out because you don't want to confuse the customer by changing too quickly.
Yep. Well, there's a lot we could say about this. So, what are like two or three like hot takes, the big pieces that people that are watching us or listening to this should leave with as they think about doing a rebrand or refreshing their brand?
Yeah, I think that exercise of trying to print everything out and seeing how everything fits together. That's a really good place to start. Also, asking yourself that question: do I have brand guidelines? And if not, trying to find somebody that can help you do that. I think one of the things that I talk to people a lot about is their trucks because they're so important. That's your first kind of people's first interaction with your brand 90% of the time. um, I tell people to do like the 100-yard test. Essentially, park your truck 100 yards away, walk and see what you can read. Right? Can you see what the brand name is? Can you tell it's a landscaping truck? Um, and if you can't see those two things, like there's a problem. So just to try to identify what you can do to get started. I know one of the things that we had planned on talking about that we really didn't touch is just design in general. I think the biggest mistake I see landscapers make in trucks, all types of design, is they don't use white space enough, right? So that's just space around the logo, space around pictures and any kind of material or bullet points that you're talking about, because too much things just confuses people. right? You want to give them their eye kind of a path to follow. So if you're cramming all of your materials, whether that's your trucks or your sales collateral, with just as much information as possible, you're making a mistake. They need to be clean and readable so that people can consume them. A lot of them are very confusing. People are looking for order. It's kind of like when you look at clouds in the sky and you start to see different animals or patterns. That's how our brains are wired. They're constantly looking for patterns. And if there isn't a pattern, they'll make one. So make it easier for them to read and consume your materials by keeping it simple.
All right. So here's a good question. What do you feel like an overrated trend in the landscape industry as it relates to branding?
Yeah, one of my, well, I shouldn't say favorites. I guess it's my least favorite, but as wraps, truck wraps have become, full wraps have become more common or maybe even more inexpensive. A lot of I see these guys do this where they put an image of their work, like a whole backyard on the side of a truck.
Or several images all
Yes,
around?
or several, or maybe just a picture of grass or trees. And then, and I show this picture sometimes in a presentation where there's this truck with trees parked in front of trees, and it's literally camouflage. Like you can't even see it anymore. It's invisible, which is exactly the opposite of what you want. You want your truck to be visible and readable, not camouflaged. So I tell people your truck is not a website. That's not the place to put images. Save that for online.
Yeah, I think what I preach is have them remember your name and have them go to your website. Now,
Mm-hmm.
again, we specialize in websites, but because that website, if it's great, can do the rest of the work. Like it can direct them to pictures, it can show them videos, it can list out all your services.
Mm-hmm.
Like they have to know who you are, what you do, and then go to the website because people
Yeah.
search online or they go to social and search too.
Yep. And then those images fade and they look terrible. It's kind of like the food images on the outside of a restaurant that have been there for 5 years and
Yeah, the Chinese restaurant, like when you go to the Chinese restaurant and they
yeah,
have the window film wrap with all of the different food on it. That's
yep,
what you're making your landscape company looking
yep,
like.
that's
Hey, if
what's
you don't
going to
like John
happen.
and Maya's opinion on this, you can hunt us down at events and harass us. I give you permission.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, so moment of truth. We don't know it all, and we've made some mistakes. I'm going to just fess up right now. I've made some mistakes. We're talking about truck wraps. And one of the things that I was critical of earlier was something that I did. And again, a lot of times when I'm like, oh, I look back and I shouldn't have done that, was, I worked for a company. We did landscaping, lawn care, tree service, and pest control. And I put a real image of a leaf, a real texture grass along the bottom, and a stink bug on the tailgate. And in the pest control vehicles, we put spiders dangling down, all that stuff. And I'll be honest, that was a bad decision. Shouldn't have done it. But again, we don't know a lot of times what we don't know. And we do these things and people are like, that's great. Because, well, the company name kind of didn't lend itself to like people really knowing everything that we did. But so I felt like that was what I had to do so that people knew. So what about you? Do you have any big mistakes in your past that you made that you look back and you're like, probably not the best choice?
Yeah, I think the one trap that I fall into is usually when I'm trying to name something, whether that's a brand or a product. Um, and this is a good tip for people. If you think it's clever, it's probably a mistake, right? If
Ooh.
you have to explain it to people, it's probably a mistake. If it's an inside joke, um, for example, one of the companies that my wife and I owned, we wanted to name it after our kids, but that didn't really make sense. So then we call them little birds. So we're going to use this like Japanese word. It had nothing to do with what we actually created. And so we just overthought it, right? Sometimes it's better to just keep it simple. Um, and we had this one coaching client who she was doing really well, and her coaching business was called Get Clients Now. So, I mean, as obvious as it gets. So, whenever I make that mistake or I'm trying to get too creative or too clever with something, I take a step back and I'm like, okay, I need to put on my Get Clients Now hat and make sure that this actually makes sense.
Oh, it's so tough for me because I love being clever. But I totally get what you're saying. There's actually a brand near me. And if you're watching this or listening, I apologize. I don't know whether it's genius or a bad idea. And maybe that's the genius. Like if you're kind of stuck between there, literally, the brand's name is Little Pecker Landscaping. I'll just leave it right there. And people want to buy their merch. They want to buy their shirts. I think it's hysterical. They have a woodpecker in their logo. I don't know that I'd do that, but it's definitely memorable. So if you're going for that, at
Yeah.
least you got
Yeah, that can work. I mean, you think about big ass fans, right? That
yeah.
brand in the commercial industry.
Love me a
You
big
know,
ass fan.
it takes a balls to do that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
You have to really be all in on it, but sometimes it can work being
Yeah.
irreverent like that.
You can't do a half-ass job at that.
No, no,
No.
no. You have to nail it. But again, it's not clever. It's just funny. It's very obvious.
Yeah.
It's sometimes when you overthink stuff, that could be a real issue. That's funny though. Little Packer landscaping.
One thing that drives me nuts is the industry's allergic reaction to spaces. Like they combine two words. I'm going to use them. I'll just say, let me find something that's not about the industry. Green backpack, and it's all one word. Like maybe they'll capitalize the green and the B and all that stuff. But I don't
Yeah.
understand there's nothing wrong with spaces, but it's kind of strange. I guess sometimes it's distinctive, but
Yeah, or they'll change the spelling of something, or just take out all the vowels. That's been kind of a trend lately. Um, doesn't help if people can't read your name. So I'd stay away from anything that feels like you're getting too cool or too clever. It's
yeah.
not good.
So when it comes to design and creativity, we all have very strong opinions. And there are some battles you pick and some you don't. So what would be your opinionated hill that you would die on?
Yeah, I don't know how opinionated it is, but it's something that I definitely won't bend on. I think we touched on this earlier, but it's that concept of white space in design. So, and it tends to be a battle with people that they want everything in every piece that they do, whether it's a truck or a uniform. And I don't know. I still haven't figured out the best way to tell them that more isn't better, right? Less is always better. They're never going to remember all that stuff in every piece that you put together. Like, keep it clean, keep it simple, keep it clear. Like, if all they remember is your name and your website, you're winning. Like, that is winning. They're never going to remember all that other stuff. You need dead space in design. And that makes people really nervous. Like, well, I paid all this money for this truck wrap, and you want 80% of it to be white? And I'm like, yes, absolutely. Because then people can read it and remember it, right? The same way with a brochure or even a presentation template, right? People just want to cram it full of so much shit that nobody can read it. And
I agree.
it becomes a battle, but it's one of those things I will not back down on because I know the psychology behind it. I know that it's correct. And I find if I can get them to do it at least a couple of times, they finally understand, right? They'll get it because their customers actually remember things.
I think it's a reaction to maybe subconsciously not doing a good job building a brand or communicating clearly anyway. Because I see this in postcards. We're like, listen, we need to put there's so much text. It's every service that we list. Instead of, you know what, I'm going to send 5 different postcards to this prospective client throughout the
Yep.
year, and they're each going to have a very simple message. Like the front, an image, small logo, headline. That's it. Maybe an
Mm-hmm.
offer. On the back, 2 small sentences, contact information, QR code, that sort of thing. Instead, they're like basically, you're trying to make a website and postcard. And I see this on websites too, where there's these walls of text. Like you can't even digest it. I'm like, no one's going to read this. Think about
Right.
scrolling on a mobile device. Like my thumb
Mm-hmm.
is cramping. That's too much. Break things up, digestible chunks. And when, like you said, when a truck's going down the street, you got 2 seconds and you can't
Mm-hmm.
put too much on it. So totally
Yep.
agree with you. I'll die on that
Yeah.
hill with you.
Yeah, here's a good thing that people can do, just to illustrate this to themselves, right? Because we're all driving around all the time, right? Whether we're going to work or somewhere else. Look at billboards, right? These billboards, we call this outdoor advertising. They have to follow specific rules in order to work. There's plenty of terrible billboards, but as you're driving down the road, obviously you should be paying attention to driving. I'm not telling you to look away from the road, but a good billboard you should be able to read and understand in seconds, right? And remember it. And usually it's like a Chick-fil-A logo, the head, and like exit 35, right? That is an effective billboard. If it's got a ton of text, you can't read it, you won't remember it, you may not even know who it is, right? If you can't tell who actually made the billboard. So that's a good way to look at that design, especially on a quick kind of glance, to understand like, okay, that works. Yes, I understand that. I'll remember that. And that I don't even know who made it. So next time you're driving down the road, try that out and you'll see why, if you have too much stuff in there, it doesn't work.
Love that. Great tips. Well, John, thanks so much for spending some time today. I know you and I could geek out about this stuff for a long time. So I really appreciate I appreciate you coming in and sharing with our audience some of your, experience, with these huge brands and how they can apply it to their landscape business. So thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Anytime. Appreciate you having me, Joe.
Again, thanks so much for joining us. We hope that this got some ideas stirring in your mind about how you can rebrand your company, or at least simplify your brand and make it a little bit better with some slight changes. If you have any questions, you can reach out to John Dalton at McFarland Stanford right through their website, or find them on LinkedIn. Same thing if you want to know how you take your new branding and make it alive on your website, your videos, and the content that you're creating for your company. You can reach out to me, Chad Diller, Landscape Leadership, either the website or find us on social.